In 2007, a cargo plane lifted off from North Korea, its hold packed with equipment capable of triggering a nuclear weapon. Its destination, Syria. If that aircraft had reached its final stop, Syria would have been only months away from possessing nuclear capability pointed directly at Israel. But the plane never arrived. Mossad intercepted it mid-flight, forced it to land in a country that doesn't even officially acknowledge Israel's existence, and seized the cargo without firing a single bullet. And the method they used was unlike anything the intelligence world had seen. Fake air traffic controllers, a hijacked radio network, and a pilot who had no idea he was being psychologically steered by Israeli intelligence. Before I take you deeper into this operation, hit subscribe, because the next moments expose a level of intelligence warfare most people never imagined. Stay with me. This is the story of one of the most precise interdiction missions ever carried out. How Mossad tracked a secret shipment moving silently from North Korea to the Middle East. How they discovered what was inside the plane without ever physically seeing it. How they manipulated a commercial aircraft using nothing more than communications, timing, and human psychology. And how this single operation prevented a nuclear crisis that could have permanently rewritten the balance of power in the Middle East. What makes this story even more unbelievable is this: Syria never admitted the plane existed. North Korea never acknowledged the shipment. And Israel has never officially taken responsibility. Even now, none of the governments involved will confirm the mission happened. But intelligence leaks, flight records, and the testimonies of people close to the operation reveal exactly what unfolded behind the scenes. To understand how Israel reached this point, you have to go back to 2006. Israel faced a rapidly escalating problem. Intelligence reports were coming in, hinting that Syria was constructing something deep in the desert, something unusual, something highly classified, and something that looked alarmingly similar to a nuclear reactor. The site was located in eastern Syria, in a barren region known as Deir ez-Zor. It stood far from major cities, surrounded by isolation and guarded heavily. Satellite imagery revealed a large structure under construction, one that matched the layout of a nuclear reactor but was disguised to look like a normal industrial facility from ground level. Israel's intelligence agencies, Mossad and military intelligence, watched the facility for months. They were certain something significant was happening, but they needed hard proof. Israel could not act on suspicion alone. They needed irrefutable confirmation of what Syria was building and how advanced the project was. If the facility was a nuclear reactor capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium, it represented an existential threat. Syria and Israel were still technically at war. They had clashed in multiple conflicts over the decades. The idea of a hostile neighbor developing nuclear weapons was unacceptable to Israeli leadership. But to justify any action, Israel needed absolute certainty. Mossad launched a comprehensive intelligence collection campaign using every tool at their disposal: high-resolution satellite surveillance, signals intelligence, cyber infiltration, and human sources embedded within Syrian networks. They began assembling a detailed picture of the facility, and in early 2007, Mossad made a discovery that changed everything. The reactor being built in Syria wasn't Syrian at all. It was North Korean. North Korea had been secretly expanding its nuclear capabilities since the 1990s. They had tested nuclear devices. They had experience in weapons production, and now apparently they were exporting that expertise to Syria. The arrangement benefited both regimes. Syria desperately wanted nuclear weapons, but lacked the technical expertise. North Korea needed money, political leverage, and partnerships with nations hostile to the West. The alliance made strategic sense. But a critical question remained. How were North Korea and Syria coordinating across thousands of miles? To move nuclear-related equipment, they needed a secure transport method, and this couldn't go through conventional shipping routes. Mossad began tracing the movements of North Korean engineers. They examined cargo routes. They monitored secretive charter companies. They intercepted communications. Slowly, a network formed, a map of how the two nations were cooperating. The answer was aircraft. The answer was North Korea had been using discrete charter cargo flights, planes operated by small companies that specialized in opaque shipments. These companies rarely inspected cargo, asked few questions, and maintained loose documentation. The flights departed North Korea, crossed Asia and the Middle East, and landed quietly in Syria. The flight paths changed frequently to avoid patterns. Sometimes they refueled in countries with weak oversight. Everything about the operation was designed for minimal visibility. This was how North Korea was supplying Syria with the specialized components needed to construct and operate the reactor. Parts Syria could not produce on its own. And then, in mid-2007, Mossad noticed something unusual. Surveillance picked up signs that North Korea was preparing a shipment of unusual importance. Signals intelligence revealed communications discussing a critical delivery, not normal construction materials, but something essential for making the Syrian reactor functional. Mossad needed to know what was inside. Intelligence came from multiple angles. They had a human source embedded inside North Korea's procurement chain, reporting on preparations for the shipment. They had intercepted communications between North Korean handlers and Syrian officials. They had surveillance teams monitoring the North Korean airport where the cargo was being loaded. Layer by layer, the picture became clearer. Analysts concluded that the shipment contained nuclear triggers, specialized components required to initiate a nuclear chain reaction inside a weapon. Without these triggers, a nuclear device cannot detonate. While the reactor itself was not a bomb-making machine, it was designed to produce plutonium, material that could be used to build nuclear weapons. And Syria wasn't just building a reactor. They were preparing to acquire the components needed to complete the process once the plutonium was ready. If this shipment reached Syrian soil, it would bring them significantly closer to operational nuclear capability. Israeli leadership reached a clear decision. This cargo must never reach Syria. But the challenge was almost impossible. The cargo plane would travel from North Korea to Syria, a route crossing China, Central Asia, Iran, and Iraq. Israel couldn't shoot it down. That would be an act of war and would kill the crew. They could not board it mid-air. Physically intercepting it was impossible. They needed another way, and Mossad developed a plan so daring it almost sounded fictional. They would take control of the aircraft remotely by manipulating air traffic control communications. They would psychologically guide the pilots into landing at a location where Israeli operatives could seize the cargo, without the crew realizing they were being directed by an intelligence agency. To pull this off, Mossad needed flawless intelligence, exact timing, and zero mistakes. They required knowledge of the plane's takeoff schedule, its expected flight path, its likely communication frequencies, and a suitable country where they could force the aircraft to land without sparking an international incident. They were about to attempt something no intelligence service had ever tried in mid-flight. And this was only the beginning. Let me walk you through how this operation actually unfolded. The cargo plane was a modified Ilyushin YL-76, a Soviet-era transport aircraft commonly used for freight across the former communist bloc and in developing nations. It was being flown by a charter company notorious for asking very few questions about the nature of their shipments. The crew was Russian, pilots and cargo handlers brought in specifically for this assignment. The aircraft was scheduled to depart Pyongyang, North Korea on July 15, 2007. Its expected journey involved refueling stops in China and possibly Central Asia before continuing towards Syria. The entire trip would take close to 18 hours, including stops. Mossad knew every detail because they had been watching the planning phase for weeks. They had the aircraft profile. They knew who the crew members were. They had the route memorized. And most critically, they knew what was inside the cargo hold. Now came the real challenge: intercepting the aircraft without triggering an international crisis. Mossad concluded that the ideal moment to seize the shipment would be during one of the refueling stops. If they could force the plane to land at an airport where Israeli operatives could operate discreetly, they could seize the cargo swiftly. But there was a problem. Most airports along the plane's route were situated in countries hostile toward Israel, or in places where Israeli involvement would ignite major diplomatic confrontation. China was not an option. Iran was absolutely out of the question. Even several Central Asian states posed geopolitical complications. But there was one potential solution: Turkey. Turkey occupies a complicated space in Israel's strategic calculations. They maintain diplomatic relations and share alliances with the United States. Yet the relationship is tense. Turkey is a majority Muslim nation with a population generally sympathetic to Palestinian causes and often critical of Israeli actions. The Turkish government must constantly balance its ties with Israel while avoiding the appearance of being too closely aligned. This meant Israel couldn't simply request Turkey's cooperation in intercepting the plane. Such a request would place Turkish leadership in a politically impossible position and risk a diplomatic explosion. But what if the plane landed in Turkey without being asked to? What if the pilots believed they were diverting because of an emergency or due to an official directive that had nothing to do with Israel? And what if Israeli intelligence just happened to be present when the cargo hold was opened? That was the strategy. Convince the pilots to divert to Turkey under circumstances that appeared completely legitimate. Then gain access to the cargo before the aircraft departed again. But how do you steer a crew into landing somewhere without them realizing they're being manipulated? This is where the operation shifts into another level of sophistication. Mossad's Technical Operations Division prepared specialized equipment capable of intercepting, mimicking, and overriding air traffic control communications. With it, they could generate signals that sounded identical to authentic controller transmissions. The gear was portable, deployable from a van, a nearby building, or even a temporary field station. Mossad placed teams in strategically selected regions where their broadcast signals would intersect with the IL-76 once it came within range. The timing had to be flawless. The plan was to wait until the plane approached Turkish airspace. Then Mossad would begin transmitting false but highly convincing air traffic control messages. These messages would create a scenario in which the pilots believed they were required to divert to a specific Turkish airport for safety reasons, but there was no room for error. If the pilots sensed anything unusual, they could contact North Korean handlers or Syrian officials. They might distrust the instructions. They might continue to follow their original route. The manipulation needed to be believable and subtle. On July 15th, the plane departed Pyongyang as expected. Mossad monitored it in real time through satellite tracking and by listening to communications between the aircraft and genuine air traffic control towers along its path. The first refueling stop in northwestern China went smoothly. The crew rested briefly, refueled, and continued west toward Central Asia. This was when Mossad's operation quietly came to life. As the plane crossed Central Asian airspace and closed in on Turkey, Mossad's technical team intensified their monitoring of all communications between the aircraft and legitimate controllers. For a period, they let everything run normally. Routine procedures would keep the crew calm and unaware. Then the IL-76 crossed into Turkish airspace. From the cockpit, this appeared to be an unremarkable segment of a long-haul cargo flight. Nothing out of the ordinary, but this was the moment Mossad had been waiting for. The technical team started transmitting on the same frequencies used by Turkish controllers. Their signal was engineered to be stronger than the legitimate one, ensuring the pilots would hear Mossad's fabricated instructions instead of the real ones. The false controller informed the crew that their flight plan had been affected by unexpected military activity near Syrian airspace. For safety, all civilian flights were being temporarily diverted. The plane needed to land at Incirlik Air Base in southern Turkey and await clearance. Incirlik is a major Turkish military installation that also hosts U.S. forces. It is capable of receiving large cargo aircraft, and its proximity to Syria made the diversion appear entirely reasonable from the pilot's point of view. The pilots responded, seeking confirmation. Mossad operatives replied with flawless aviation terminology, providing updated heading information and detailed landing instructions. Everything sounded perfectly authentic. The pilots complied. Diversions happen in aviation for many reasons: weather, military traffic, emergencies. This seemed like one of those routine reroutes. The IL-76 altered its course and headed toward Incirlik. When the pilots attempted to contact what they believed was Incirlik's tower for landing clearance, they were still speaking to Mossad operators. The simulated controller granted clearance. The aircraft descended and landed. Now the situation grew more complex. Incirlik is an active military base with Turkish and American personnel. The arrival of an unscheduled North Korean cargo plane could not go unnoticed. According to intelligence leaks, Mossad coordinated discreetly with the CIA, not for authorization, but because U.S. personnel on the base needed to be aware something unusual was happening. The CIA relayed limited information to the necessary American and Turkish officials, ensuring that confusion would not compromise the operation. When the aircraft landed, it was guided to an isolated section of the airfield. The Turkish base commander was given a vague but urgent briefing. The plane might be carrying illicit or prohibited equipment, and a thorough inspection was required. Crucially, the Turks were not told the full scope of the situation. If they later faced questions, they could claim they were simply enforcing security protocols. The Russian crew was informed that their cargo required screening before departure. This was not unusual. Military bases sometimes inspect civilian cargo aircraft. The crew was escorted to a separate waiting area. Meanwhile, Mossad agents, operating under cover identities and with temporary credentials arranged beforehand, gained access to the cargo hold. They opened the sealed containers. What they found confirmed their intelligence: nuclear triggers, specialized components engineered to initiate nuclear detonation. These items had zero civilian application. Their presence indicated an active nuclear weapons program. The agents documented everything: photographs, video footage, serial numbers, and chain of custody evidence linking the equipment back to North Korean weapons facilities. This would later become irrefutable proof of Syria's nuclear ambitions. Then Mossad secured the shipment. They removed the functional components and replaced them with visually similar but non-functional substitutes. The containers were resealed meticulously to appear untouched. This step was critical. If the cargo looked tampered with, Syria or North Korea might instantly realize the mission had been compromised. If Syria had received empty containers or cargo that looked obviously tampered with, they would have instantly realized the shipment had been intercepted. They would have changed their entire procurement network, tightened their protocols, and found new covert channels to acquire the components they needed. But if the shipment arrived looking perfectly intact, sealed, normal, untouched, yet was secretly non-functional, it could take Syrian technicians weeks or even months to realize they had been deceived. And by the time they uncovered the truth, the damage would already be done. The entire inspection and switch out took roughly 4 hours. Once Mossad's team completed the operation, they quietly withdrew from the airfield. The cargo plane was then cleared to continue along its route as if nothing unusual had happened. The pilots were informed that the security inspection was complete and they had permission to proceed to Syria. From their perspective, the delay was annoying but not suspicious. The aircraft took off again, crossed into Syrian airspace, and eventually landed as scheduled. Syrian officials received the cargo and transferred the sealed containers directly to the reactor site in Deir ez-Zor. And somewhere inside that secretive desert complex, technicians attempting to integrate the components into their system would have eventually discovered that the equipment was useless, devices that looked authentic but were completely non-functional. But by the time Syria realized the deception, the real nuclear triggers were already in Israeli hands. Meanwhile, the actual components seized in Turkey were moved through covert channels and delivered to Israeli nuclear specialists. Their analysis confirmed Mossad's worst fears. These were not ambiguous industrial parts. These were sophisticated trigger mechanisms, precision-engineered devices used exclusively to initiate nuclear detonations. They matched known North Korean design signatures and were manufactured in facilities tied to weapons production. There was no dual-use explanation. These were tools for building nuclear bombs. For Israeli leadership, this was the smoking gun, not just intercepted conversations or suspicious satellite images, but physical proof that Syria and North Korea were working together on nuclear weapons development. Hardware in hand, the intelligence community presented the findings to top decision-makers. The seizure confirmed the reactor's purpose and bought valuable time by delaying Syria's progress, but it wouldn't stop the program entirely. Syria could always order replacement components and continue construction. So in September 2007, just 2 months after the intercept, Israel initiated a decisive operation. A squadron of Israeli fighter jets flew deep into Syrian territory and bombed the reactor at Deir ez-Zor, obliterating it before it ever became operational. Syria never rebuilt the facility. The combination of the cargo plane intercept, which crippled Syria's ability to complete the reactor, and the follow-up airstrike, which eliminated the threat entirely, effectively ended Syria's nuclear ambitions. But what makes this entire chain of events extraordinary is the silence that followed. None of the governments involved acknowledged anything. Syria never admitted they were constructing a nuclear reactor. Their explanations for the destroyed facility varied. Some called it a military warehouse, others an agricultural building. They never mentioned the intercepted cargo and never acknowledged receiving defective components. North Korea denied providing nuclear assistance to Syria and insisted they had no involvement in any Syrian nuclear program. Turkey issued no public confirmation that a suspicious cargo plane had landed at Incirlik. As far as official Turkish statements were concerned, nothing out of the ordinary happened that night. Israel, as usual, maintained strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying their role in the intercept or the airstrike. Even the United States, which undoubtedly knew the details, maintained a careful silence, acknowledging only that a Syrian facility with nuclear characteristics had been destroyed. This coordinated silence served everyone's interests. Syria avoided admitting to nuclear proliferation, which would have triggered severe international consequences. North Korea avoided being exposed for exporting nuclear technology. Turkey avoided being seen as cooperating with Israel. Israel preserved the secrecy of its intelligence methods. Still, over the years, the truth began to surface. Intelligence leaks, declassified documents, and investigative journalism slowly reconstructed the full picture. Former intelligence officers provided testimonies. Flight records and satellite imagery were cross-referenced. And the story of this covert operation emerged piece by piece. The diversion of the cargo plane, the simulated air traffic control communications, the seizure of nuclear triggers at a Turkish military base, and the evidence that eventually justified the airstrike. This operation illustrated several critical realities about modern intelligence work. First, the unmatched value of signals, intelligence, and long-term surveillance. Mossad detected the shipment months in advance because they had eyes and ears inside communication networks, procurement channels, and international logistics systems. Their intelligence apparatus allowed them to predict and intercept the shipment before it ever became a threat. Second, the operation demonstrated the power of advanced technical capabilities. The ability to mimic air traffic control transmissions and redirect a massive cargo aircraft in mid-flight shows a level of precision and technological sophistication far beyond Hollywood-style spy cliches. This was not movie theatrics. It was real-world manipulation of radio frequencies, timing, and aviation psychology. Third, the mission required delicate international coordination. While Israel executed the core of the operation, cooperation from U.S. personnel at Incirlik and tacit tolerance from Turkish authorities were essential. High-level intelligence operations often rely on silent partnerships where nations cooperate without ever acknowledging it. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, the mission showed the effectiveness of subtlety. Mossad never forced the plane down with jets or created a dramatic confrontation. Instead, they engineered a scenario that appeared entirely natural: a routine diversion, a standard inspection, and an uneventful continuation of the flight. Their goal was not just to seize the cargo, but to ensure Syria didn't immediately realize what had happened. That delay was crucial. The seized nuclear triggers were later shared in closed-door briefings with other governments. They served as concrete proof of Syrian-North Korean cooperation and justified Israel's preemptive strike. Some components were reportedly provided to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which attempted to investigate, though Syria refused full access. The cargo plane crew never knew any of this. To them, it was simply a routine diversion, a frustrating inspection, and a regular delivery. They had no idea they had been manipulated so smoothly that the entire operation felt like normal aviation protocol. And they had no idea they were unknowingly part of one of the most impactful intelligence interdictions of the 21st century. This operation stood apart from missions where crews are forced, threatened, or coerced. The pilots of this cargo flight were never met with weapons, never confronted with intimidation, and never aware that anything unusual was happening. They simply followed what appeared to be legitimate aviation instructions. They responded to what they believed were real air traffic controllers. They complied with procedures they had practiced their entire careers. The brilliance of the operation lay in the psychological finesse behind it. The Mossad operators who impersonated Turkish controllers had to mimic every detail flawlessly. They needed the right cadence, the right phrasing, the right level of urgency. They had to confidently answer questions in a way that would soothe any doubts. One incorrect term, one hesitation, one sentence that felt even slightly out of place could have shattered the illusion. If the pilots had grown suspicious, they would have contacted their real dispatchers or Syrian air navigation authorities. They might have reached out to Pyongyang. And once that happened, the entire deception would have collapsed. This mission exposed a vulnerability in global aviation many countries still don't fully address. Air traffic control communications are not encrypted. Every transmission is broadcast openly on predictable frequencies. Anyone with the right equipment can listen, and anyone with more advanced equipment can imitate. The cargo plane intercept became an example often referenced quietly in aviation circles whenever the topic of communication security resurfaced. But encrypting global aviation networks is expensive, technically challenging, and politically complicated. Many nations simply haven't implemented meaningful protections, which means even today, the same vulnerability lingers. After the 2007 airstrike on the Syrian reactor, analysts pored over the imagery. Before its destruction, the structure's layout matched North Korean reactor designs almost perfectly. After the bombing, Syrian forces bulldozed the ruins and constructed a new building over the site within weeks, an attempt to bury the truth beneath layers of concrete and sand. But it didn't work. The seized nuclear triggers, the intelligence from human sources, and the satellite photos formed a clear picture. The facility was designed to produce weapons-grade plutonium. If this reactor had ever become operational, Syria could have produced enough plutonium for multiple nuclear weapons per year. Combined with its missile capabilities, this would have given Damascus the ability to threaten Israel with weapons of mass destruction. The strategic consequences would have transformed the Middle East overnight. Israel's doctrine has been consistent for decades, first articulated under Prime Minister Menachem Begin, whose 1981 strike destroyed Iraq's Osirak reactor. Israel would not allow hostile neighbors to develop nuclear weapons. The 2007 operation in Syria became the second major test of that doctrine. And without the cargo plane interception, the airstrike alone might not have been enough. By capturing the nuclear triggers, Mossad accomplished several objectives simultaneously. They slowed Syria's progress. They acquired undeniable physical evidence. They uncovered the precise supply chain North Korea was using to proliferate nuclear technology. And they sent a message to every hostile state in the region. Israel would find a way to stop nuclear proliferation, no matter where, no matter how. That message wasn't just meant for Syria, it was meant for every country considering secret cooperation with North Korea. It signaled that no shipment was guaranteed to arrive safely. It warned that intelligence agencies were watching air routes, sea routes, logistics networks, and covert procurement pipelines. That deterrent effect changed calculations across the region. North Korea also learned lessons from the incident. They adapted, they diversified their routes, they tightened operational security, they compartmentalized information more aggressively, but they continued proliferating. Their weapons technology still found its way to Iran, Pakistan, and others. Sanctions slowed them down but did not stop them, which is why operations like the cargo plane intercept became part of a broader global strategy, quiet interdictions, intended to physically block dangerous transfers before they triggered global crises. These interceptions happen far more frequently than the public realizes. Weapons components, missile parts, nuclear materials, shipments vanish, are rerouted, or mysteriously fail to reach their destinations. Most of these operations are never acknowledged. The countries involved prefer secrecy over scandal. Only the Syrian operation became widely known because enough fragments surfaced over time, interviews, leaked memos, and the undeniable evidence from the reactor site. Behind these missions are people who operate in total anonymity. Men and women who cannot publicly claim credit, even when they prevent catastrophes. Their work goes unnoticed, because success means the world never sees what almost happened. The intercepted rocket parts that never reached a militia. The chemical precursors that never made it to a hidden lab. The covert shipment that disappeared quietly in the night. Intelligence at this level is measured in the disasters that never occurred. The Mossad officers who orchestrated the cargo plane operation undoubtedly received internal recognition, quiet commendations, closed-door acknowledgments, but their names remain sealed in classified files. Their contribution won't appear in history books. Their operation shaped the region's future, yet their identities will remain unknown. This is the nature of intelligence work. You carry immense responsibility without the promise of public appreciation. You shape events from the shadows. You prevent crises the world will never hear about. You operate in silence, succeed in silence, and disappear back into silence. And yet, the impact of this one operation was enormous. It halted Syria's nuclear ambitions. It protected millions of people from the threat of nuclear escalation. It disrupted North Korea's proliferation network. It reinforced international norms against nuclear trafficking. It demonstrated that the right intelligence, the right timing, and the right level of deception can change the course of an entire region. All because a team of operatives manipulated radio waves, redirected a plane without force, opened a set of sealed containers, and erased their footprints so thoroughly that for years the world had no idea anything had happened at all. That is the power of a flawlessly executed intelligence mission, altering history without leaving a visible trace. Before you go, if you want more hidden stories, covert missions, and secrets buried beneath official silence, subscribe to Mossad Black Vault. The next operation we uncover might change the way you see global intelligence forever.